Picture this: October 14th, 1066, a small hill in southern England, where two armies face each other, and neither side knows that the next few hours will completely reshape the future. The Battle of Hastings stands as one of those rare moments in history where you can point to a single day and say, everything changed after this. I mean, everything from the language we speak to the way governments were structured across Europe and beyond. Let me take you back to what led to this moment, because understanding the build-up makes the battle itself even more incredible and worth exploring. England in 1066 was a prize that everyone wanted, and when King Edward the Confessor died without an heir in January of that year, three powerful men believed they had the right. Harold Godwinson moved fast and got himself crowned king within days. But across the English Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, was furious because Edward had supposedly promised him the throne. To make things even more complicated, Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, also thought he deserved to be England's ruler and was preparing his own invasion from the north. Now here comes the part that makes you realize just how intense this year was for Harold, because he had to deal with two invasions at almost the same time. Hardrada invaded from the north with a massive Viking army, and Harold marched his forces over 180 miles in just 4 days to meet him at Stamford Bridge, where he won. But while Harold was celebrating in the north, William landed on the southern coast with around 7,000 Norman soldiers, and Harold had no choice but to march his exhausted army back south. The English forces were tired, and many of his best warriors had died at Stamford Bridge, and they had just walked hundreds of miles. But Harold was determined to defend his kingdom. When the two armies met near Hastings, the English took position on top of Senlac Hill, which gave them a huge advantage because attacking uphill is brutal for any army at all. Harold's forces formed a shield wall, which was a classic defensive formation, where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with their shields overlapping to create an almost impenetrable barrier around them. Behind this wall stood the Huscarls, who were elite warriors, armed with massive two-handed axes that could split a horse in half with one powerful swing through the air. The Normans had a different approach because William brought cavalry, archers, and infantry together in a combined force that could adapt to different situations on the battlefield as needed. When the battle began on the morning of October 14th, William ordered his archers to fire uphill, but the arrows had limited effect because the English shields were too strong. The slope worked against the Norman arrows, and then William sent his infantry charging up the hill, and this is where the English shield wall showed its true defensive power. The Normans were cut down as they tried to break through, and after hours of brutal fighting, the Norman left flank started to retreat down the hill in apparent defeat. Some of the less experienced English soldiers made a fatal mistake here by breaking formation to chase the retreating Normans down the slope away from their strong position on top. Once they left the protection of the shield wall on top of the hill, the Norman cavalry circled around and cut them down in a devastating counterattack that changed everything. Whether this Norman retreat was planned or accidental, historians still debate today, but William saw what happened, and he used this tactic again, ordering fake retreats to lure more soldiers. The battle raged for hours, and both sides were taking heavy casualties. But the English shield wall held firm, and William knew he needed to try something completely different. He ordered his archers to fire high into the air so the arrows would come down on top of the English formation, rather than hitting their shields directly from the front. This changed everything because now the English soldiers had to raise their shields above their heads, which weakened their wall and exposed them to attacks from Norman infantry and cavalry. According to legend, one of these high-arcing arrows struck King Harold in the eye, though some historians think he might have been cut down by Norman cavalry instead. Either way, the result was the same because Harold died on that battlefield, and once the king fell, the English defense began to collapse around his fallen body completely. The Huscarls fought to the death around their fallen king, refusing to surrender even as the battle turned against them, and by nightfall, the English army had been totally destroyed. William had won, but the victory came at a tremendous cost, because thousands of men lay dead on that hillside, and the flower of English nobility had been wiped out. Now let me tell you why this battle mattered so much, because the changes that followed reached into every corner of English life for generations and centuries to come. William marched to London and was crowned King of England on Christmas Day 1066, and over the next few years he faced rebellions from the English people who refused. William crushed these uprisings with brutal efficiency, and the harrying of the north in 1069 to 1070 saw his forces destroy entire villages, kill livestock, and burn crops across northern England. This led to a famine that killed thousands, and this harsh response sent a clear message that Norman rule was here to stay and would not be challenged. William then did something that completely transformed English society by introducing the feudal system in a way that had never been fully implemented before in England at all. He declared that all land in England belonged to the crown, and he redistributed it to his Norman followers in exchange for military service and loyalty to him. This meant the Old English aristocracy lost their lands and power, while Norman nobles became the new ruling class that would dominate England for centuries after the conquest was complete. This created a new social structure where everyone from the poorest farmer to the richest lord owed loyalty and service to the person above them in the hierarchy. At the top of this pyramid sat the king with absolute authority over all lands and all people throughout the entire Kingdom of England under his rule. To keep track of all this land and wealth, William ordered the creation of the Domesday Book in 1086, which was a massive survey recording who owned what. This document gave William unprecedented control over his new realm, and it remains one of the most important historical records we have from medieval England even today in our time. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the Norman conquest was on the English language itself, because when the Norman French-speaking rulers took over, French became the language of power. For the next 300 years, England was essentially a bilingual society, and this linguistic mixing created the English language we know today with its rich vocabulary from multiple sources. Thousands of French words entered English during this period, and they enriched the language enormously by giving us synonyms and new ways to express subtle differences in meaning. The Norman conquest also connected England much more closely to continental Europe, because William was still Duke of Normandy, and his successors would hold lands in France. This meant English kings spent much of their time across the Channel and were involved in French politics, which led to centuries of conflict between England and France. The 100 Years' War might never have happened if Harold had won at Hastings and changed the course of history in that moment on the battlefield. The architectural landscape changed too, because the Normans were master builders who constructed massive stone castles across England, and these castles served both military and political purposes everywhere. The Tower of London Durham Cathedral and countless other Norman buildings still stand today as reminders of this transformation that happened nearly 1,000 years ago in England. The legal system was overhauled as Norman law mixed with English traditions to create a new framework that eventually evolved into English common law for the future. This later spread across the British Empire and influenced legal systems around the world, including in America, where we still use many principles that trace back to Norman innovations. The church in England also changed because William brought in Norman bishops and abbots who reformed religious practices and strengthened ties to Rome, making the English church more aligned. Even the way warfare was conducted shifted because the Normans brought advanced military tactics castles and the full use of cavalry, which changed how battles were fought. So when we look at what happened on that October day in 1066, we see a battle that lasted only hours, but its effects rippled through centuries. If Harold had won at Hastings, English might be a completely different language, perhaps closer to German or Dutch than to French as we know it today. England might have remained more isolated from continental affairs and developed along a distinctly different path culturally and politically throughout the medieval period and beyond into modern times. The feudal system might never have taken such strong root in England, and the social structure of medieval Europe could have evolved differently, affecting millions of lives. That single day in 1066 stands as proof that battles can indeed change history forever, and the Norman conquest shaped the English-speaking world in ways we take for granted.